Hi there. Welcome to my webinar, Why is IVR Important? My name is Allison Smith. I am a professional telephone voice, and this presentation discusses IVR, or interactive voice response, anytime you call a company and you encounter an automated essence. I'm discussing exactly why it's important that IVR is done professionally and done well to eliminate caller frustration and confusion. So make sure you keep track of any questions you may have for me, because I'll give you my contact coordinates and I'll do my best to answer any and all questions. So let's get right to it. So a website called Marketingland determined that 74% of callers that were questioned when they encountered a single negative phone experience would actually hang up and move on to the competition. When you think about it, it's a staggeringly high number, and it really makes you think that you really do only have one chance to get this right and to design a telephone system that does not alienate or confuse callers. So caller frustration is something that I face head on every day when I'm recording IVR. And luckily, I've been at this long enough that most of my clients are actually asking my opinion about things that they should do to reduce the idea that callers are going to get frustrated and leave and go to a different company. So this is what it's all about, is to make an enjoyable experience while maneuvering through a phone system, and to just cut out altogether this idea that callers get frustrated when they don't get into the right department that they require. So I have 5 gold standards that I always ask clients to follow when they are designing a telephone system. And they are, number 1, don't offer too many choices. So my recommendation is 3 to 5 menu items max. Do not offer anything more than 5 choices right off the top. I personally don't think that the human brain can retain any more than 5 choices or remember 5 choices. Urgent or critical prompts should be front stacked. In other words, anticipate what the top 5 reasons are that someone would call your company and arrange those in order of urgency, or perhaps the choice that's most often chosen, if that makes sense. And if you have to have a subdirectory, and I'm not a big fan of subdirectories, if you must include a subdirectory, which is, for example, if you ask someone in the main menu, press 3 for technical support. If they press 3 and it goes to another menu that further sorts them within technical support, that's called a submenu or a subdirectory. If you have to do that, limit those choices in that subdirectory to 3 options. Again, I'm not a fan of them to begin with. No subdirectories unless absolutely necessary. Golden rule number 2, don't make it difficult to speak with a human. So always offer a live agent option. It's amazing to me how many people actually don't want to put the option press 0 for an operator because they're afraid that it's going to get abused or misused and that people will not do the self-serve of going through the entire menu. I think they will. I think we're all very self-serve and turnkey. So always offer a live agent option. People nowadays are extremely turnkey. They want to solve the problem and they will not abuse that live agent option. Number 3, don't use cookie cutter prompts. We all know what those are. So callers are sick of the same old lines. Your patience is appreciated. Please listen to the entire menu before making an option. You know those ones. These are sort of hackneyed, out-of-date expressions that everybody feels compelled to include in their phone system. Don't be afraid to show your personality and steer away from those kind of cliche phrases that we all hear. You should look upon designing your IVR as a chance for you to do something unique and make your menu options stand out in the caller's mind as opposed to being the same old prompts that kind of drone over and over. Golden rule number 4, don't try to do too much with an IVR. So it's a method to do basic sorting. It really is just a way to organize callers into various departments. Most callers will still need some human interaction. As self-serve as people are, they will still need to speak to a live human at the end of the IVR process. So again, not trying to do too much with an IVR, and don't expect it to serve your customers. Don't look at IVR as a substitute for customer service. And number 5, don't forget to ask for feedback. So, it's important to track call drop-off. It's important to determine exactly where callers drop off. And hopefully by finding that out, you'll determine why they're dropping off. But a lot of people do not implement caller metrics to determine exactly what's going wrong. Another thing is very few companies ask for feedback on their phone system. So more and more I'm doing IVRs where people will have a post-call survey, a short 3 or 5 questions about how the service was. I did one recently in which the company was asking, on a scale of 1 to 5, how easy was it to use our phone system? So I thought that was fantastic. Most callers, unless they're me, will not give you any kind of feedback about what it was like to use your phone system. And of course, if you're asking for those metrics, it's important to pay attention to the feedback with regards to customer satisfaction of the IVR. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a blog article for Digium, who manages the Asterisk open source PBX, who I voice for. And I wrote up my top 15 rules for IVR, and here they are. Number 1, do not overestimate your caller's attention spans and patience. They're both shorter than you think. Think about yourself the last time you had to carve out time to call a company. You definitely wanted to arrive at a solution quickly, and you resented the amount of time it took out of your day to arrive at a solution. So respect their attention spans and their level of patience. Number 2, do not create fake mailboxes. It's okay to be a small company. So, of course, I voice for Fortune 500 companies, massive companies, and I also voice for a lot of really, really tiny small enterprises. And it's amazing how many of the small companies really want to appear bigger. So they create a more complicated phone menu and they create fake mailboxes because they perceive that they will be seen as a bigger enterprise than they are. So I always tell people it's okay to be this small guy growing. It's totally fine. I understand. I am pretty much a one-woman company as well. So there is also a danger in creating fake mailboxes if they actually go somewhere and you're not monitoring them. So just kind of be honest and make sure that all of the options route to somebody who is actually going to provide service. Keep things simple. So what I want people to do is to avoid this. This is terrifying. This was actually sent to me by a client and a good friend of mine. This was the actual IVR schematic. Now listen, these schematics are great for mapping out exactly where calls go and where they get routed, and just to make sure that you have them going logical places. But keeping it as simple as possible will benefit everybody, including, your design staff that actually designs where the calls go. And for gosh sakes, do not send this to your voice talent to voice the IVR script. Many people have. It's very, very hard to tell what is an instruction, a whisper, and what is the actual thing that you want voiced. So sort of disregard this schematic, use it for the planning stages, but do not submit it. Number 4, always give callers an opt-in. So in other words, your choices should be the best choices available, and hopefully you've determined exactly what the most popular reasons for someone calling in would be, and those should be your options. But always entertain the idea that perhaps none of those options apply to them, and that they should always be given the chance to opt in and talk to a live agent. Front load important messages. So I always tell this story of voicing an IVR for a cardiology clinic in Florida, and they had 12 choices, which is, as we've covered, far too many choices. And the very last choice was, if this is a medical emergency, hang up and dial 911. So I told them that they should probably front stack any emergency or critical prompts at the very beginning. That goes for, also if you do computer support and you offer emergency support in some way, make sure that those are at the front of the menu. Understand what constitutes a prompt. So this is more for when you are submitting a script to a talent and you need them in separate sound files. So the question in that phrase that's on the left-hand side of the slide, how many prompts are in that sentence? That's a single prompt, right? No, actually, it's 15 or more. So each phrase is a standalone and needs to concatenate well with other phrases. So in other words, each of those segments needs to be voiced and saved into a separate sound file. So in other words, you have reached is one prompt. Extension, whatever it is, all of the different extensions have to be in a standalone sound file all of their own. So it's important for you to know that where the edits are going to be, and each of those constitutes a prompt. Understand the effects of proper punctuation in concatenation. So in other words, your use of punctuation when you write an IVR script will greatly influence how things are intoned, if that makes sense. So in other words, the phrase, "Thank you for calling," if it is followed by a few ellipses, that means there is something to be connected on to the end. However, if there are ellipses at the beginning and a period at the end, it will sound like this: "Thank you for calling." That's very finite. That tells me it's at the end of a sentence. Same with your PIN number. Probably the numbers are going to be following that. When they have ellipses on either side of the phrase, such as your PIN number, it means there's something before it and something after it. And of course, the last phrase with the period at the end, your PIN number. We have logged your PIN number. Be aware of the idea that the punctuation will actually drive how the phrase is said. Top tip number 8, do not give directions to your office or facility. This was really big a few years back before GPS was prevalent in almost all vehicles and all phone devices. So it used to be a standard thing that people would say, if you're approaching from the north, turn left on Highway 451, blah, blah, blah. Directions from all different directions. And it's absolutely not necessary. Give the address and people will put it into their GPS and you'll see them soon. You don't need to have the voice talent read all of the driving directions. This is a really important one. Give a pronunciation guide to proper names and places. So I'm pretty intuitive and I'm pretty good at figuring out pronunciations of, as I say, proper names and places, but they can be tricky. So it's important to point out to the voice talent exactly how to pronounce, especially place names that you may see as kind of a given. Especially if someone's not from your region, it's probably a good idea to provide a pronunciation guide. This is a tricky one. Number 10. Name your company something that does not require a special instruction. So it's amazing how many people name a company that's a variation of a word like that company on the right-hand side. Acquisition. Pretty cool, right? Well, it's very difficult for someone to take that, what they've heard, and type it into a web browser. Fishy companies. Yeah. These are examples of companies that are tricky to pronounce. And again, if I have trouble pronouncing them, how does the general public deal with them? So it's really, really important when forming a company to decide on a name that isn't going to deliberately trip people up just because, you want to be creative about it. Number 11, don't go overboard with niceties. They do become kind of cloying after a while. So this is more for things like on-hold systems where we hear these phrases that say, your patience is appreciated. We know your time is valuable and stuff like that. So if people hear it too often, it just becomes a little bit like white noise and it sounds disingenuous. So make sure that you do not go overboard with niceties. Number 12, read the copy out loud. So the spoken word and the written word as you're reading it from the paper are two very, very different things. It is amazing how many times I voice a system for a client and they write back and they say, it wasn't until we heard you read it out loud that we caught how awkward that wording is. So my recommendation always is that people take their IVR copy and they find a quiet room where they won't be heard and read it out loud. It is amazing what you will discover from actually hearing the words come off the page, something that just scanning the page with your eyes will not reveal. Number 13, be clear on your company's image. So I always look up a website of a company that I'm going to be voicing for just to get a feel of their personality and just what sort of a company they are. It's very, very helpful for you to impart the direction to your voice talent about exactly who you are in your industry. You could be a financial institution, but you may be catering to a younger, maybe more irreverent type of clientele. A lot of investment companies and banks are trying to demystify investments and money in general and take the fear out of the subject. So many companies will buck the tradition of the industry that they're in. So if you can provide details of exactly what your company's like, it is extremely helpful so that you have a consistent brand message in your phone system as you do with your website and social media and everything else. Number 14, don't front load your opening prompt with too much information. So this script is verbatim what I voice for a company. I've changed some details, but it's really, really, really wordy. And yeah, it actually times out to about 1.5 minutes when read. And it's talking about how they're fast as possible and they provide unparalleled quick service. And yet they're forcing you to listen to this gigantic protracted message. So if you have company information, background information about the company, include that in an on-hold segment and do not bog down the opening message with too much content, much like this. And number 15, if you want conversational, write it that way. Luckily, I'm not asked to do too many redos, but when I am, it's almost always as a result of things sounding a little too written and too robotic, and people want things to sound conversational, and that's fair enough. However, if the copy is not written in that style, it's very hard to pull sort of a natural performance out of it. So it's amazing how much technical, dry material that I'm asked to read in a conversational way. If you want it conversational, I suggest that it's written in that style as well. I hope that makes sense. So that is pretty much the end of this presentation. Here's my contact coordinates. You can visit my website, which is the ivrvoice.com. I can be reached at allison@theivrvoice.com. And of course, connect with me on Twitter. I am @voicegal. And yes, feel free to send me any questions or observations you may have about this presentation. And of course, if you have any IVR you need voiced, send me a message about that as well. So thank you so much for listening.